Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 9 of our Spring Security course. So this is an extension of our previous lesson about the session management, and in this lesson I am going to talk about the concurrency control. This is an interesting topic and you must have seen it on some of the applications you might be using in your day-to-day life. For example, in banking applications, most of the banking applications, they will not allow you to log in from the different browser at the same time. So if you're logged in from now Firefox and if you try to log in from the Chrome, it won't let you to log in and say there is already an active session, and these are a security restriction where you want to control few things, right? And then in some of your subscription products where you sell the subscription based upon a number of users, you want to restrict the number of login for a given user. So what does that mean is, if someone bought a subscription saying, okay, I want only for one user, if that user is already logged in and if we try to do a login from a different locations, you don't want to allow that, right? Because it's a violation of that licensing. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about those different things, and Spring Security provides a built-in mechanism for most of those things, right? So we are going to talk about what Spring Security Concurrent Session Control is, how it internally works, how you can restrict those number of concurrent sessions, and then some of the common issues, or not the issues, but in the sense that what are the different things or the precautions or the points which you should be clear on, right? So we will see some of the configuration, default configurations, customization point, and then we will get into a deeper details, dig into the internal working of the Spring Security. In order to do that, we will again go back to our main Spring Security configuration file. So our file as usual is extending the web security configuration adapter, and all the related Spring Security control will go into this class, right? And we will continue extending our session control thing, okay? Let's remove this one, okay? And then we will continue to using our session management thing. So this session management aspect controls like your session invalidations, then this concurrent session control, and then in next chapter we are going to talk about uh, the Spring Security session management or the session fixation things, right? Okay, so in order to control the maximum session, this is the property maximum session, and in this one takes an integer, and you can tell Spring that what is the maximum session you want to allow per customer. It's not about entire application, it's about per customer or the logged in customer, right? By default, there is no restriction. So if you don't specify this thing, by default Spring Security don't put any restriction. So you can log in from n different places and Spring Security won't control it, won't complain about it, right? So now we have set the maximum session as 1. So what we're going to do is, this is the basic configuration for now. We will start our application and then see the behavior in action. What will happen if we set the maximum session to 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to set, right? Alright, so I'm already logged in from the Firefox. Okay, let's try to do a login from a different browser. Okay, so I'm onto the Chrome. We'll try to do login. It works, right? So right now I am technically logged in from two different places, one from the Chrome and one from the Firefox. Okay, so let's try to do some action onto the Firefox. Okay, if I refresh it, everything works fine. Now let's go back to Firefox and do the same thing. If I do a refresh, that means I'm trying to take another action, assuming that I'm already logged in, right? In this case, I will get this message, and this is the out of the box message, right? Which tells the customer that, hey, you have already exceeded your limit, correct? So this is the default behavior. So what is happening when you set the maximum concurrent session for a given user? What happen is Spring Security will allow you to log in from your second place, but it will invalidate your previous session, right? So the most recent login attempt will be activated, will still be active from the Spring Security perspective, but your other sessions will be deactivated by Spring Security. So there are two fundamental problems here. The first problem is, in many applications it's confusing. Think about it. You were working onto this Firefox doing some work, said accidentally you logged in from the second browser or a different browser, and then when you take an action you got this message, which is confusing. For as a user, I really don't know what happened, right? That's one problem. It's a problem, or I will put in a different way. It's not a very good user experience, but if you want to still continue that one, it's up to you. Okay, right. The second problem is this is not something you want, right? Your application might have a different look and feel, and you want to adapt your error message, or you want to give a different error message, and you want to redirect customer to a different screen, right? And that's a very fundamental requirement for any of the application. And for both the cases, Spring Security provides you uh, the built-in mechanism where you can use the configuration, same session management thing, to control the behavior, right? So let's see what we can do for both the things. All right. So the first thing what we are going to do is we are going to control that what should happen if the maximum, if the customer has already exceed this configuration, right? So for that one, you can use the expired URL. This will tell Spring Security that, hey, when this happens, instead of showing that a default message, you should redirect customer to my login screen, right? And then you can always pass invalid session is equal to true. This is the request parameter that can be passed. Okay, so that's the first thing that you can do. So what is going to happen is when this case arises, Spring Security will pass the control to login controller and will pass this parameter, request parameter, right? If you look into our login controller, we are basically accepting this request parameter. It's an optional, and then if we have that one, I'm storing it into the model and returning to login page, and in that login page I'm showing this message. And so I have the full control. How do I want to show the message? If I want to show a different message, I can control that one. All right, so that's the first aspect of doing that one. Now to to get back to the second issue, right, where what was happening is my previous session got invalidated, and the latest request was accepted, or the login request was accepted by Spring Security, right? So in order to handle that one, there is another configuration which says max session prevention login is equal to true. Okay, if this is active, if this thing is active, expired session URL will not work but as per your expectation. So don't assume that if you am setting this session prevent login as true, then again with the what we did earlier in our demonstration, customer will be redirected to the login page. And the reason is when you set this max session prevent login, so what is happen is you're telling Spring Security that for the second attempt, don't even do don't even allow customer to do a login. Instead of that one, show the login error message to the customer. So if I am logged into the Firefox and then I try to log in from the Chrome or a different browser, instead of having that behavior where I was able to log in from the Chrome, in this case you will get a login error message. So Spring Security will not allow you to log in from that Chrome browser. Okay, so just to give you clarity that if this is set true, you won't be redirected to the invalid session thing. All right. Another thing which we will be discussing in more details, in order for this entire functionality to work together and correctly, make sure that you have configured the HTTP session event publisher. Now this event publisher is an interesting thing, and Spring Security uses it internally, and we will going to talk about that one. So what happen is with every session event, this publisher will publish the event, and then Spring Security uses those events to take a call whether you should be allowed to log in or how many sessions we have and all those things. So don't worry, I'm going to talk about that in this video itself, right? Now if you start your application and try to do the same exercise what we did earlier, right, you will see a different behavior. So on your second browser you will get the login error message. I restarted my application and now I am logged into the Firefox, right? Now let's try to do a login into our Chrome browser. Okay. And if I try to do a login, you see I'm getting this username and password is incorrect because I'm telling Spring Security that hey, don't even allow the login from the second attempt, right? So continue with the current session and don't try to kind of invalidate my previous session and create a new session for us. So that's give you an idea how you can control the session uh, concurrent sessions in Spring Security. There are different aspects. Just hold on that one and I'm going to talk about those ones. But now the next interesting question is how it internally works. What are the different classes and what are the different filters and strategies those are being managed by the those are being used by the Spring Security, right? So in order to understand, I am going to give you an overview or the workflow, how it works internally, and I'm going to talk about the different aspects, and then we will put at some debugger points to understand it more clearly. So this is the high level of a workflow, how this entire functionality was working internally by within the Spring Security, right? Uh, so we have a different session. First of all, I'm going to talk about this section, right? This one. So we have a different session authentication strategies. So this is an interface, right? And there are different implementations of this interface, all right? Uh, so session authentication strategy determines what should be my authentication strategy. So which strategy I should use when the user try to log into my application, right? So that's the first thing. Session management filter is a filter which intercepts every request and then it basically handle the core mechanism or the authentication process to session authentication strategy, right? Because we are setting the concurrent control, so we are telling Spring Security that hey, use the concurrent session authentication strategy to authenticate the user. So concurrent session control authentication strategy will find out the different configuration, like how many number of different logins you are allowing for a given users, and then what are the different configurations, whether it should be onto the default error message or you have configured something different, right? Now the other interesting thing is how Spring Security knows that what are the different active sessions for a given customer, and that's where the session registry will get into a picture. So the default implementation of the session strategy is it's an in-memory, think of it as an in-memory map. Okay, so this map contains two things. One is the session ID, and I'm just giving you a simplified view. It contains a lot of other different things, but on a simplified view, think of it as a map. It contains a session ID, and that it also contains the information who is the user or who is the or the authenticated object with that session ID, and that authenticated object is nothing but a user information which includes your login ID. All right, so that session registry will keep a list of all the active sessions and who are the users associated with those active sessions, right? So now if you are already logged in, there will be a record into the session registry which says user number one, and here is the authenticated object for that one. Now if you try to do a login from the different browser, correct, in that case Spring Security will find out, hey, there is already an active session for you in the session registry, right? So it will basically use this concurrent session control strategy, authentication strategy, and determine that hey, this is not allowed, and now it will basically invalidate your request, right? So in order for this session strategy, session registry to be updated at the real time, that's where our HTTP session event publisher will get into picture. For every session event, if a new session is created or if a session expired or are destroyed, right? In that case, this event publisher will publish an event, and that event will be updated into the session registry, right? So if the login happened, you did a login for the first time, there will be an event. That event will be published, and the session registry will be updated saying, okay, this is the session ID and this is the user. And if let's say you logged out or your session is invalidated, another session event will be published, and again same thing will happen. So that gives you an idea. Now, to give you a more clear picture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some debugging around a one workflow, and then we'll see how it works. So in order to understand, I have already put few debugger points. One of them is onto the composite session authentication strategy. So it calls the different authentication strategies. In our case, it is going to call the concurrent session authentication strategies. This one, right? I already have a session registry, right? This registry is basically keep track of all the active sessions and who is associated with that those sessions, right? So let's do one thing, okay? So if you see, I'm already logged in from the Firefox. Now I'm going to log in from a different browsers, okay? Let's do a sign in. So I got into this method, and if you see, delegate is nothing but a concurrent session control authentication strategy, right? And that entirely we dictate this one because we added that configuration. Let me close this one. We are telling the Spring Security that we use that session management thing, and we use the concurrent session control thing, okay? So let's go back to our thing, and I'm going to get into the method, okay? Now in my concurrent session control authentication strategy, let me increase the size a little bit, okay? The first thing what I'm going to do is, if you see, it is for authentication principle, it is going to see how many sessions are there for this given principle, and this principle is nothing but the information which we are passing on, right? And this is contact us, the same login ID, right? You can go to this session registry, but what is going to happen is, in this case, it will say I already have a one session, okay? Let's close this one, and you see session is one because I'm already logged in from the Firefox, and you can get into this detail, this method session registry. This is nothing but a session registry IMPL, right? Now it says that I have a count as one, and then what are the allowed count, and again this is we are dictating in our application, so we are allowing maximum session as one. So session is not less than, so this condition will be false. -1 is the default configuration. If you don't specify it, this will be false, and now this is where we fall, right? Now we are into a situation where it says that we have kind of get into a position where we have already exceeded the allowed configuration, and in that one the control will go to allowable session exceed strategy. And if you go inside this one, there are a number of different things. To save some time, I'm not going to talk about it. You can always look into concurrent session control strategy, but what it happen is it basically find out all the sessions, sort it out, and then it takes a call which session it needs to invalidate, right? In case of default behavior, and should it allow or should it not allow. So you can go into those details, but the idea was to give you an understanding that how internally it works, right? And at the end of this lesson, I'm definitely going to talk about few other things, okay? uh, if you're using it, there are a few things which you should be very clear. For example, if you are using a custom user detail object, and for most of the enterprise application you will end up creating your custom user detail object. uh, This is object where if you're using a custom user detail service, if you have not you don't understand it, go back to my previous lessons. This basically this is an authenticated object which is returned by Spring Security. So if you have created your custom user detail object, make sure you override the equals and hash code method. And the reason for that one is, if you remember, I was talking about the the session, right, where Spring Security tracks all the active sessions, the session registry, it's an in-memory map. And in order for it to identify the authenticated user, it needs the equals method to identify that one, and any wrong implementation or no implementation will give you a wrong result, so it will not able to identify those details. So make sure you overrides equals and hash code methods, right? This is a fundamental requirement. Okay. The second thing is, which is sometimes confusing, if you are using the default implementation, right, the remember me functionality will not be part of the this session control thing. So if you are logged in from a one browser, let's say it's a Chrome, right, on your Firefox, when you did your last login, you used the remember me functionality, right? So now if you're already logged into from Chrome and you open the Firefox, it will auto login using the remember me functionality, correct? For this one, the default configurations, the setup will not work. That means your concurrent session control will not be enforced and the user will be logged in from the second browser. So that's one of the fundamental issues. So you should be aware of that one. And there are some techniques to handle it. I'm going to talk about those ones, right? The other thing is the clustered environment. So if you are onto the cluster environment, the default implementation again will not going to work, because uh, session registry, as I said, right, it's an in-memory implementation. So every cluster will have their own registry, and the for maybe the different cluster will not have information about their in-memory map, right? So that's another problem. There is another problem if your application restarts, right? So that means your session registry will be empty. So it will be all the data from that session registry will be gone, because it's in memory, right? Uh, and then what happen is, because the sessions are controlled by the application server, right? So it start and you refresh the browser, you will be auto logged in based upon that JSession ID, right? That's how the entire application works. But from the Spring Security Session Registry perspective, it will still be zero. So it will basically, there is a memory leak or there is a disconnect, right? So you will be logged in, automatically logged in, but session registry will say it's zero. So that means if you try to do a login from the another browser, it will allow you to do that. Okay. Now how to control few of the things, right? What I was talking about. So for example, a cluster environment. So in order to do that, either you create your custom session registry, saving everything somewhere, or having a way to communicate the different between the different nodes. So for example, if session is destroyed in one node, you basically publish an event, cluster event, and then all the nodes will update their session registries. That's the one way of doing it. The second way, which is more easy, more really scalable, you use the Spring Session API. So that is a module which basically control or which centralize the session creation strategy. So it use a single place and all the sessions are being managed from that single place, right? So you should use that one. So what is going to happen is all the cluster will go to a single place, and I have a tutorial for that one. You can find that into the description. So all the clusters will go to the same location, get the session information. So if you use the Spring Session API, you're going to solve all the problems starting from 2, 3, and 4. Because remember me again, you have a single place to get the session information, right? And then cluster environment, when your application restart, that will also solve the problem, because now instead of having your session into the in memory, there is no way your session information will be wiped out when it restart, because there is a different system who is managing the entire sessions. I hope you like this tutorial, and if you like it, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.